10 p.m. we can see a man walking down towards the sea, a white man in his 30s with brown hair, and in his arms is a child 3 to 4 years of age, blonde hair, wearing pyjamas. Very close description to that of Madeleine McCann. Two effects that have never been in the public domain of this one individual. Really important for us to understand who he is.
Kate and Gerry McCann have both been today declared acquitted with no bail conditions, and no charges have been brought against them. The investigation continues.
The thing is that the timeline that everyone was working on for years in this case was wrong.
We're almost certain now that this sighting is not the abductor. But very importantly, what it says is that from 9:15, we're able to allow the clock to continue to move forward. And in doing so, things that have not been quite as significant or received quite the same degree of attention are now the centre of our focus.
The narrow streets of Praia da Luz were quiet that night. It was May 3rd, 2007, just before 10 p.m., when the Smith family, Martin, his wife Mary, and their children were walking back to their holiday apartment after an evening at Kelly's Bar. The Portuguese resort town was peaceful, tourists tucked away in restaurants or settling in for the night. That's when they saw him. A man walking purposefully down the middle of the street, carrying what appeared to be a sleeping child. The little girl, approximately 3 to 4 years old, was wearing light-colored pajamas. Her arms hung limply at her sides, her head rested against the man's shoulder. Martin Smith would later recall how strange it seemed. This man carrying a child who wasn't wrapped in a blanket despite the cool evening air. No bag, no child's belongings, just a man, walking briskly toward the beach, cradling a motionless little girl. The Smiths passed within a few feet of him, close enough to notice his medium build, his brownish hair, his beige trousers, close enough that they should have remembered his face. But the streetlights cast shadows, and the encounter lasted only moments. They continued on their way, thinking little of it. 4 months later, Martin Smith was watching television at his home in Ireland. The news showed footage of the McCanns returning from Portugal to the UK, and there was Gerry McCann, descending from the airplane steps, carrying his 2-year-old son Sean against his shoulder. Something about the way Gerry moved, his gait, his posture, the way he held the child, triggered a memory so powerful that Smith felt the blood drain from his face. "Jesus," he reportedly told his wife, "that's the man I saw that night." The man carrying a child through the streets of Praia da Luz, at almost the exact time Madeleine McCann was discovered missing from her holiday apartment. Could it really have been Gerry McCann himself? The official timeline said Gerry was at the tapas restaurant with friends when the Smith family had their encounter. Witnesses placed him there. His alibi seemed solid. But what if the timeline was wrong? What if the witnesses were mistaken? Or what if there was a window of opportunity no one had considered? For years, this sighting was overshadowed by another, Jane Tanner's report of seeing a man carrying a child near the McCann apartment earlier that evening. The investigation focused there, while the Smith sighting faded into the background. Until 2013, when everything changed. Today, we're going to examine one of the most controversial questions in the Madeleine McCann case. Could Gerry McCann have been the man the Smith family saw that night? We'll break down the timeline minute by minute. We'll map the distances. We'll analyze the witness statements and the subsequent investigation, and we'll ask why, for years, one sighting dominated the narrative while another was pushed aside. This isn't about accusations. This is about following the evidence wherever it leads. Where are you watching from today? Let me know in the comments as we dive into one of the most perplexing aspects of this heartbreaking mystery. Before we analyze the Smith sighting in detail, we need to understand the events that unfolded on May 3rd, 2007, a date that would become etched into the public consciousness. 3-year-old Madeleine McCann was on holiday with her parents, Kate and Gerry McCann, both physicians from Leicestershire, England, and her younger twin siblings, Sean and Amélie, at the Ocean Club Resort in Praia da Luz, Portugal. The family had arrived on April 28th for a week-long vacation. The McCanns were traveling with 7 friends, collectively known as the Tapas 7, David and Fiona Payne, Diane Webster, Fiona's mother, Matthew Oldfield and his wife Rachel, and Russell O'Brien and his partner Jane Tanner. These 4 couples, along with the McCanns, had travelled to Portugal together, forming a close-knit group of professionals with young children. On the evening of May 3rd, the adults had dinner reservations at the Tapas restaurant, approximately 50-60 metres from the apartments where their children slept. The restaurant was part of the Ocean Club resort, but required adults to leave the apartment complex, walk around the pool area, and enter through a separate gate. This meant the children were not directly visible from the dining area. According to statements, the group had established a routine of checking on their sleeping children throughout their meals. The McCann's apartment, 5A, was on the ground floor with a patio door facing away from the restaurant and a bedroom window facing the parking area and street. Here's the timeline as initially reported. 8:30 p.m. The McCanns put Madeleine and the twins to bed in the front bedroom of apartment 5A. 8:40 p.m. The McCanns leave their apartment, locking the front door but reportedly leaving the patio doors closed but unlocked, and head to the Tapas restaurant to meet their friends. 9:05 p.m. Gerry McCann conducts the first check on the children, entering through the patio doors. He reports seeing all 3 children sleeping soundly. He exits the apartment, leaving the patio door closed but unlocked. 9, 10, 9, 15 p.m. Jane Tanner leaves the table to check on her own children. On her way, she claims to have seen a man carrying a child in pajamas walking across the top of the road in front of the apartment block. This became known as the Tanner sighting. 9:30 p.m. Matthew Oldfield checks on the McCann children, but later states he only listened at the door without actually seeing Madeleine. 10 p.m. Kate McCann goes to check on the children and discovers Madeleine is missing from her bed. The twins continue sleeping undisturbed. Kate immediately raises the alarm. 10:10 p.m. The resort is alerted and staff begin searching the grounds. 10:30 p.m. The Portuguese police, Polícia Judiciária, or PJ, are called. What's crucial to our investigation today is what happened between 9:05 p.m. when Gerry last saw Madeleine and 10:00 p.m. when Kate discovered her missing. This 55-minute window contains both the Tanner sighting at approximately 9:15 p.m. and the Smith sighting at approximately 9:50 p.m. The Portuguese police, led initially by Inspector Gonçalo Amaral, arrived on the scene that night. Their early investigation focused heavily on the apartment itself and the Tanner sighting. The crime scene was compromised by the number of people who entered apartment 5A that night, including resort staff, police, and friends of the McCanns. Within days, the case became an international media sensation. The McCanns launched a high-profile campaign to find their daughter, bringing in private investigators and media specialists, including former government spokesman Clarence Mitchell. The investigation took a dramatic turn in September 2007, when the Portuguese police named Kate and Gerry McCann as arguidos, formal suspects, a status that was later lifted in July 2008, when the case was archived due to insufficient evidence. In 2011, at the request of the McCanns, the British government launched Operation Grange, a review and later full investigation by the Metropolitan Police. This operation would eventually lead to the 2013 revelations about both the Tanner and Smith sightings that we'll explore in detail. Throughout this complex case, the timeline of May 3rd has been scrutinized, revised, and debated. The window of opportunity for an abductor, or anyone else, to have taken Madeleine was narrow. The proximity of the tapas restaurant to the apartment, the frequency of the checks, and the logistics of removing a child from the apartment without being seen all present challenges to any theory. And that brings us to our central question. If the Smith family saw someone carrying a child at nearly the same time Madeleine was discovered missing, and if Martin Smith later believed that person resembled Gerry McCann, could there be a connection? Or is this simply a tragic coincidence in a case full of misleading paths? If you're finding this analysis valuable, please hit that subscribe button now. I release new true crime investigations every week, and your support helps this channel grow. What time is it where you're watching? Drop it in the comments. I'm curious to see where this case resonates around the world. The investigation into Madeleine's disappearance hinged largely on 2 reported sightings of a man carrying a child through the streets of Praia da Luz on the night of May 3rd. These sightings, occurring approximately 35-45 minutes apart and in different locations, would come to represent one of the most perplexing aspects of the case. Let's examine each in detail. Jane Tanner, one of the Tapas 7 and a close friend of the McCanns, left the restaurant at approximately 9:15 p.m. to check on her own children. As she walked along the road in front of the apartment block, she claims to have seen a man carrying a child walking across the top of the road, moving away from the McCann's apartment. In her police statement, Tanner described the man as between 35-40 years old, approximately 5'7" to 5'10" in height, wearing beige or light-colored trousers, wearing a dark jacket or coat, walking quickly but not running, carrying a child who appeared to be wearing light-colored or pinkish pajamas. The child was being carried horizontally across the man's arms, with the head toward the left side of the man's body. Tanner noted she could see the child's legs dangling. What makes this sighting particularly significant is its timing and location. If accurate, it placed a man carrying a child just minutes after Gerry McCann had checked on the children at 9:05 p.m. and in the immediate vicinity of apartment 5A. Tanner's sighting quickly became the focal point of the investigation. Within days, artist sketches based on her description were circulated worldwide. The image of this man carrying a child became the primary lead in the search for Madeleine. There was, however, a complication. During the time Tanner claimed to have seen this man, Gerry McCann was reportedly standing on the same street talking with another holiday maker, Jez Wilkins. Neither Gerry nor Jez recalled seeing Jane Tanner pass by, nor did they see the man with the child. This raised questions about visibility, timing, and the accuracy of recollections. Despite these concerns, for 6 years, the Tanner sighting dominated the narrative of what might have happened to Madeleine McCann. The Smith sighting, 9:50-10 p.m. Approximately 35-45 minutes after Jane Tanner's sighting, and about half a kilometer away, the Smith family had their encounter. The Smiths, Martin, his wife Mary, and their children, were Irish holidaymakers walking back to their apartment after an evening at Kelly's bar. On Rua da Escola Primaria, near the church and heading toward the beach, they passed a man carrying a young child. In their statements to Portuguese police on May 26, 2007, the Smiths described the man as white, European appearance, 35-40 years old, medium build, approximately 5'9" to 5'10", in height, short brown hair, wearing beige or light-colored trousers, carrying a child who appeared to be about 4 years old. The child was wearing light-colored pajamas. The child appeared to be sleeping, with arms hanging down. Unlike Tanner, the Smiths had a close encounter with this individual, passing within a few feet of him. Despite this proximity, they couldn't provide a detailed description of his face, stating that they hadn't paid particular attention to his features in the moment. What makes the Smith sighting extraordinary is what happened 4 months later. In September 2007, Martin Smith was watching television coverage of the McCanns returning to the UK from Portugal. The footage showed Gerry McCann descending the steps of an airplane, carrying his son Sean. According to reports, Smith was struck by the similarity in the way Gerry carried his son, the posture, gait, and overall manner, to the man he had seen in Praia da Luz. He contacted the police to report this observation, stating he was 60-80% certain that the man he saw that night was Gerry McCann. Comparing the 2 sightings. When we place these sightings side by side, several similarities and differences emerge. Similarities. Both described a man of similar age and build. Both described the man wearing beige or light-colored trousers. Both described a child in light-colored pajamas. Both described the child as appearing to be asleep. Differences. The Tanner sighting occurred at approximately 9:15 p.m., the Smith sighting at 9:50-10 p.m. The locations were approximately 500 meters apart. Tanner described the child being carried horizontally across the arms. The Smiths described the child being carried against the shoulder. Tanner was alone. The Smiths were a group of 9 people. Tanner was a friend of the McCanns. The Smiths had no connection to them. Perhaps the most striking difference was in how these sightings were treated by the investigation. The Tanner sighting became the centerpiece of the search for Madeleine, while the Smith sighting received comparatively little attention, especially after Martin Smith made his connection to Gerry McCann. The significance of the 2 sightings. These 2 sightings present us with several possibilities. They were the same person seen at different times and locations. They were different people, both coincidentally carrying children at night. One sighting was accurate and one was mistaken. Both sightings were mistaken or misremembered. If the same person was responsible for both sightings, the timeline suggests they would have had to walk from near the McCann apartment to the area near the church in approximately 35–45 minutes, a journey that would normally take about 5 to 7 minutes. This raises questions about where this person might have been during the intervening time. If they were different people, it presents the remarkable coincidence of 2 men carrying children through a small resort town on the same evening that a child went missing. The weight given to the Tanner sighting shaped the entire investigation for years. The Smith sighting, despite involving multiple witnesses and a subsequent potential identification, remained largely in the background until 2013. What's the weather like where you're watching from today? As we continue to unravel this mystery, drop a comment below. Sometimes I wonder if our perspective on cases like this is influenced by whether we're watching in sunshine or rain, in the comfort of day or the uncertainty of night, not unlike how the streetlights and shadows of Praia da Luz might have affected what witnesses saw that fateful evening. To evaluate whether Gerry McCann could have been the man the Smith family saw, we need to meticulously reconstruct his movements on the evening of May 3rd. The critical period runs from 9 p.m. to 10:15 p.m., encompassing both sightings and the discovery of Madeleine's disappearance. Gerry's official timeline. According to police statements and witness accounts, here's what we know about Gerry McCann's whereabouts during this crucial time frame. 8:35, 8:40 p.m. Gerry and Kate leave apartment 5A and walk to the tapas restaurant where they join their friends. 9:05 p.m. Gerry leaves the tapas restaurant to check on the children. He enters apartment 5A through the patio doors, observes all 3 children sleeping and exits the same way, closing but not locking the doors. 9:08 to 9:10 p.m. On his return to the restaurant, Gerry encounters Jez Wilkins, another holidaymaker, on the street outside the apartments. They stop to chat for several minutes. 9:10, 9:15 p.m. During this conversation with Wilkins, Jane Tanner reportedly walks past and sees the man carrying a child. Neither Gerry nor Jez notice Tanner or this man. 9:15 to 9:20 p.m. Gerry returns to the tapas restaurant and rejoins the table. 9:30 p.m. Matthew Oldfield leaves the table to check on his children and offers to check the McCann children as well. He later reports listening at the door but not actually seeing Madeleine. 9:55, 10 p.m. Around this time, the Smith family has their sighting near the church, approximately 500 meters from the McCann apartment. 10 p.m. Kate McCann leaves the restaurant to check on the children and discovers Madeleine is missing. She returns to the restaurant in distress. 10:05, 10:10 p.m. Gerry and the rest of the group learn that Madeleine is missing. They begin searching the apartment and surrounding areas. The Jez Wilkins encounter, a critical alibi. The conversation between Gerry McCann and Jez Wilkins is pivotal to establishing Gerry's whereabouts during the early part of the evening. In his statement to Portuguese police, Wilkins confirmed meeting Gerry on the street between the apartments and the tapas restaurant. Wilkins, who had been pushing his young child in a stroller to help him fall asleep, estimated their conversation lasted about 3 to 5 minutes. He recalled Gerry appearing relaxed and normal, mentioning how well the children were sleeping. This encounter serves as Gerry's primary alibi for the time of the Tanner sighting. It places him on the street outside the apartments at precisely the time Jane Tanner claims to have seen a man carrying a child in the same vicinity. However, neither Gerry nor Jez recall seeing Jane Tanner walk past them, nor do they remember seeing anyone carrying a child. This discrepancy has never been fully resolved, though lighting conditions, angles of view, and the focus of their conversation could explain why they might have missed seeing Tanner or the man she described. The critical window, 9:20 p.m. to 10:06 p.m. For Gerry McCann to have been the man the Smith family saw at approximately 9:55, 10:00 p.m., he would have needed to leave the tapas restaurant unnoticed after returning from his 9:05 p.m. check, make his way to apartment 5A, remove Madeleine from the apartment, travel approximately 500 meters to the location of the Smith sighting, return to the tapas restaurant before Kate discovered Madeleine missing at 10:10 p.m. Is this physically possible? Let's break it down. The distance from the tapas restaurant to apartment 5A is approximately 50-60 meters, a walk of less than 1 minute. The distance from apartment 5A to the location of the Smith sighting is approximately 500 meters, which would take about 5 to 7 minutes to walk at a normal pace. Therefore, the round trip from the tapas restaurant to the Smith sighting location and back would take approximately 12 to 16 minutes, not including any time spent in the apartment. The key question becomes, was Gerry McCann continuously present at the tapas table between 9:20 p.m. and 10 p.m.? According to statements from the tapas 7, Gerry remained at the table during this period. However, these statements have several limitations. The dinner was casual, with people getting up to check on children or use restrooms. It was dark, the table was on the edge of a pool area, and not everyone had a clear view of all other diners at all times. No independent witnesses, restaurant staff or other diners provided minute-by-minute accounts of who was at the table. The statements were taken days after the event, when memories may have been affected by stress and subsequent discussions. Russell O'Brien and Jane Tanner left the table for extended periods to tend to their sick child. Matthew Oldfield and Rachel Oldfield provided statements supporting Gerry's presence, but neither specifically mentioned continuous observation of him during the critical window. Time, windows, and possibilities. If we assume the witness statements are accurate, and Gerry remained at the table continuously, then he could not have been the man the Smiths saw. However, if there was an unaccounted-for period, even as brief as 20-30 minutes, during which Gerry left the table without it being specifically noted or remembered by the others, the timeline becomes more problematic. The physical distances involved make it technically possible for someone to leave the restaurant, go to the apartment, proceed to the Smith sighting location, and return within approximately 20-25 minutes. What's crucial to understand is that no time-stamped evidence, such as CCTV footage, phone records, or independent witnesses, exists to definitively place Gerry at the tapas table throughout the entire period between 9:20 p.m. and 10 p.m. If you're finding this detailed timeline analysis valuable, take a moment right now to hit the like button. It helps more people discover this in-depth investigation and signals to YouTube that you appreciate this level of detail in true crime content. Where are you watching from? I'm always fascinated by how this case has captured attention worldwide. Drop your location in the comments. I'd love to see the global reach of this investigation. For 6 years, the investigation into Madeleine's disappearance was dominated by Jane Tanner's sighting. The image of a man carrying a child away from the McCann apartment became the central focus of the search. Then, in October 2013, everything changed. In 2011, at the request of the McCanns and following intervention by then Prime Minister David Cameron, the Metropolitan Police launched Operation Grange, a full-scale review of the Madeleine McCann case. Led by Detective Chief Inspector Andy Redwood, the team meticulously re-examined every piece of evidence, witness statement, and investigative decision. On October 14, 2013, the BBC aired a special episode of Crime Watch focused entirely on the Madeleine McCann case. During this broadcast, DCI Redwood revealed what he called his revelation moment, a breakthrough that would fundamentally alter the direction of the investigation. The man Jane Tanner had seen carrying a child at 9:15 p.m. was not an abductor. He was an innocent British tourist returning to his own apartment with his daughter after picking her up from the resort's evening childcare facility. The Metropolitan Police had identified this man, interviewed him, and even had him recreate his journey while wearing similar clothing to what he wore that night. "We are almost certain that this sighting is not the abductor," Redwood stated on the program, "but rather a father who was carrying his child home from the night creche. It is vital that we identify this man and eliminate him from our inquiries." This revelation effectively removed what had been considered the primary sighting of Madeleine's potential abductor from the timeline. The entire focus of the investigation had been built around a man who, it turned out, had nothing to do with the case. In the same Crime Watch program, DCI Redwood introduced something that should have been made public years earlier: 2 EFIT images based on the Smith family's sighting. These EFITs had actually been created in 2008 by Oakley International, a private investigation firm hired by the McCanns' Find Madeleine Fund. The firm had interviewed members of the Smith family and produced these computer-generated images of the man they had seen carrying a child near the church. Yet these EFITs were never released to the public until the 2013 Crime Watch program, 5 years after they were created. DCI Redwood described the Smith sighting as now being of vital importance to the investigation. The program featured a reconstruction of the Smith family walking through Praia da Luz and encountering the man with the child. The EFITs were presented as potentially showing the face of Madeleine's abductor. What Redwood did not mention during the broadcast was Martin Smith's statement that he believed the man resembled Gerry McCann. This connection was conspicuously absent from the Crime Watch presentation. Redwood's revelation moment fundamentally shifted the timeline of the investigation. With the Tanner sighting eliminated, the Smith sighting became the primary reported sighting of a potential abductor. This created a new scenario. Rather than Madeleine being taken at around 9:15 p.m., the time of the Tanner sighting, the abduction likely occurred closer to 10:00 p.m., just before Kate McCann discovered her daughter missing. This compressed the window of opportunity for an abductor and raised new questions about the sequence of events. If Madeleine was taken just before 10:00 p.m., it meant the abductor had very little time to enter the apartment, take the child, and leave without being seen by Kate McCann, who discovered her missing moments later. The new timeline also meant that Matthew Oldfield's check at 9:30 p.m. took on greater significance. If Madeleine was still in her bed at that time, though Oldfield admitted he couldn't actually see her, it further narrowed the window for an abduction to between 9:30 p.m. and 10:00 p.m. The delayed prominence of the Smith sighting raises a critical question. Why was this potentially crucial evidence not given more attention in the early investigation? Several factors likely contributed to this oversight. 1. Timing of the Smith statements. The Smith family didn't come forward immediately. They returned to Ireland after their holiday and only provided statements to Portuguese police on May 26, 2007, more than 3 weeks after Madeleine's disappearance. By this time, the investigation was firmly focused on the Tanner sighting. 2. The Gerry McCann connection. When Martin Smith later came forward in September 2007 to say the man reminded him of Gerry McCann, the Portuguese investigation had already begun to consider the McCanns as potential suspects. This connection may have been seen as supporting that theory rather than as an independent lead to be pursued. 3. Political and media pressure. The case had become highly politicized, with significant British media support for the McCanns. Any suggestion that implicated Gerry McCann would have been extremely controversial. 4. Jurisdictional issues. The Smith family was in Ireland, outside the immediate jurisdiction of the Portuguese police, making follow-up more complicated. 5. The private investigation. The EFITs created based on the Smith sighting were commissioned by the McCann's own fund, but were never released publicly until Operation Grange highlighted them in 2013. This raises questions about why the McCann's own investigators didn't publish these images earlier. The delayed emergence of the Smith EFITs represents one of the most perplexing aspects of the investigation. If these images showed a potential abductor, why weren't they circulated worldwide immediately after they were created in 2008? And if Martin Smith's connection to Gerry McCann was considered significant. Why wasn't this aspect of the sighting more thoroughly investigated? What time is it where you're watching from? Drop it in the comments below. I'm curious because this case has always struck me as one where timing is everything, from the precise minutes between checks on the children to the years it took for crucial evidence to come to light. The passage of time shapes not just how events unfold, but how we perceive and interpret them. With the key facts established, we can now analyze whether it was physically possible for Gerry McCann to have been the man the Smith family saw, and what implications this has for understanding Madeleine's disappearance. Praia da Luz is a small resort town. The distances involved in this case are not great. From the tapas restaurant to apartment 5A, approximately 50-60 meters, a 1-minute walk. From apartment 5A to the location of the Smith sighting on Rua da Escola Primaria, approximately 450-500 meters, a 5 to 7-minute walk. Total distance for a round trip from the tapas restaurant to the Smith sighting location and back, approximately 1.2 kilometers, 12-15 minutes of walking at a normal pace. If we add time to enter the apartment, collect Madeleine, and potentially deal with any complications, the entire journey could reasonably be completed in 20 to 25 minutes. The Smith sighting occurred at approximately 9:50 p.m. For Gerry to have been this man, he would have needed to leave the tapas restaurant around 9:40 p.m. and return by 10 p.m. when Kate discovered Madeleine missing. Is this timeline feasible? Physically, yes, the distances and timing make it possible, but this possibility depends entirely on whether Gerry was absent from the tapas table during this period, something his friends have denied in their statements. However, it's worth noting that the dinner was casual, with people regularly getting up to check on children. In the dim lighting of an outdoor restaurant with conversation flowing and attention divided, would a brief absence of 20-25 minutes necessarily have been noticed and later remembered accurately by everyone present? The cornerstone of this entire question is Martin Smith's statement that the man he saw reminded him of Gerry McCann. This wasn't an immediate recognition. It came 4 months later while watching television footage. Smith stated he was 60-80% certain the man he saw was Gerry McCann. This percentage is crucial to understand. It's not a definitive identification, but neither is it a vague resemblance. It represents a significant degree of confidence from someone who had no connection to the McCanns and no apparent reason to make such a claim. What exactly triggered Smith's recognition? It wasn't the man's face. Smith had already stated he couldn't recall the facial features clearly. Rather, it was the way Gerry McCann carried his son down the airplane steps, his gait, posture, and overall manner of carrying the child. Body language experts note that such movement patterns can be highly distinctive and recognizable, sometimes more so than facial features, especially in low-light conditions. However, they also caution that such recognitions can be subject to confirmation bias, particularly after months of media coverage. Smith never wavered from his statement, despite the controversy it caused. He maintained that he was not making an accusation, but simply reporting what had struck him as a significant similarity. When we examine the various accounts and evidence, several contradictions and compatibilities emerge. Contradictions. Gerry McCann's alibi places him at the tapas restaurant during the time of the Smith sighting, with multiple witnesses corroborating his presence. The Smith family described the man as wearing beige trousers and a dark jacket. No evidence suggests Gerry was wearing such clothing that evening. If Gerry had left the table for 20-25 minutes, it seems unlikely that none of his friends would have noticed or later recalled this absence. The logistics of removing Madeleine from the apartment, carrying her through town, and returning to the restaurant without arousing suspicion present significant challenges. Compatibilities. The physical description provided by the Smiths, height, build, age, hair color, is broadly compatible with Gerry McCann's appearance. The timing of the Smith sighting, 9:50 p.m., occurred just before Kate discovered Madeleine missing at 10 p.m. The location of the Smith sighting, heading toward the beach area, represents a logical route if someone wanted to temporarily remove a child from an apartment. Martin Smith, who had no connection to the McCanns or the case, felt strongly enough about the similarity to contact authorities. This central question can be viewed from several perspectives. The coincidence theory. The man seen by the Smiths was an innocent tourist, similar in appearance to Gerry McCann, who happened to be carrying his child through Praia da Luz at the same time Madeleine went missing. Martin Smith's later recognition was a case of confirmation bias after months of media coverage. The mistaken identity theory. The Smiths did see someone carrying a child, possibly the actual abductor, but Martin Smith's later association with Gerry McCann was a mistake triggered by the similar way many parents carry sleeping children. The timeline error theory. The witness statements regarding Gerry's continuous presence at the tapas restaurant contain inaccuracies due to the chaos of the evening and the passage of time before statements were taken. This created an unnoticed window during which Gerry could have been absent. The deliberate misdirection theory. The most controversial perspective suggests that Gerry McCann was indeed the man the Smiths saw and that the timeline and witness statements were deliberately constructed to create an alibi. Each of these perspectives has supporters and detractors, with varying degrees of evidence and speculation supporting them. What's important to understand is that no definitive proof exists for any of these theories. Only a collection of witness statements, timelines, and subsequent recognitions, all subject to the fallibility of human memory and perception. If you've stayed with me this far, you clearly appreciate detailed analysis of complex cases. Hit subscribe now and turn on notifications. I dive this deep into true crime cases every week, examining the evidence that others often overlook. What's the weather like where you're watching from? I'm curious because sometimes I wonder how our environment affects how we process information about cases like this. Are you watching in bright daylight, or are the shadows gathering around you, just as they were in Praia da Luz that fateful night? The question of whether Gerry McCann could have been the figure in the Smith sighting remains one of the most controversial aspects of the Madeleine McCann case. After examining the evidence, we're left with a complex web of possibilities rather than definitive answers. Let's review what we know with certainty. The Smith family encountered a man carrying a child through Praia da Luz at approximately 9:50 p.m. on May 3, 2007, around the same time Madeleine was discovered missing. Martin Smith later stated he was 60–80% certain this man was Gerry McCann, based primarily on his gait and manner of carrying a child. The physical distances and timing make it theoretically possible for someone to have left the tapas restaurant, gone to apartment 5A, proceeded to the Smith sighting location, and returned within approximately 20–25 minutes. Multiple witnesses stated that Gerry McCann remained at the tapas restaurant during this critical time window, though these statements were taken days after the event. Operation Grange, after eliminating the Tanner sighting in 2013, elevated the Smith sighting to primary importance, but notably omitted any reference to the potential Gerry McCann connection. What we don't know, and may never know, is equally important. Was Gerry McCann continuously present at the tapas table between 9:30 p.m. and 10 p.m., or could there have been an unnoticed absence? Why were the EFITs based on the Smith sighting not released until 2013, despite being created in 2008? How reliable is Martin Smith's 60–80% recognition, based as it was on gait and posture rather than facial features, and occurring 4 months after the original sighting? If the man wasn't Gerry McCann, who was he? And why has this person never come forward despite worldwide publicity about the case? These questions invite us to consider the limitations of the evidence. Human memory is fallible, especially under stress. Witness statements can contain inconsistencies without any deliberate deception. Coincidences do occur even in the most tragic circumstances. The Smith sighting may represent a crucial missed opportunity in the investigation, or it may be a red herring that diverted attention from more productive lines of inquiry. Without additional evidence, CCTV footage, independent witnesses, or forensic data, we cannot definitively resolve the central question. What we can say is that the handling of the Smith sighting, its initial downplaying, the delayed release of the EFITs and the omission of the potential Gerry McCann connection from the 2013 Crime Watch program raises legitimate questions about the thoroughness and objectivity of the investigation. As we conclude this analysis, I invite you to reflect on how easily narratives can be shaped by which evidence is emphasized and which is minimized. In the Madeleine McCann case, the focus on the Tanner sighting for 6 years potentially obscured other valuable leads, including the Smith sighting. The truth about what happened to Madeleine McCann may still be hidden somewhere in the details of that night, perhaps in a sighting that was dismissed too quickly, a timeline that contains subtle inconsistencies, or a witness statement whose significance wasn't fully appreciated. Where are you watching from, and what's your take on this aspect of the case? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this analysis valuable, please subscribe to Criminal Instinct for more in-depth examinations of complex true crime cases. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. And remember, sometimes the most important evidence isn't what we see but what we overlook.